On a quiet Alabama morning in 1985, a man who had never pulled a trigger in his life woke up to find his freedom already gone. Anthony Ray Hinton, 29 years old, soft-spoken, hardworking, a man who loved his mother more than anything, stepped into a world that believed in justice. But justice didn't believe in him. Within hours, Ray's life was dismantled by a single accusation. No gunshot residue, no fingerprints, no eyewitness who knew him, just fear, pressure, and a justice system that needed a conviction more than it needed the truth. And once the state decided Ray was guilty, nothing, not evidence, not logic, not innocence, could stop the machine. He was thrown into a world built to break him, a world where men waited to die. For 30 years, Ray sat on death row, watching the lights flicker, hearing the final footsteps of those led away, wondering if his day would come next. And yet, somehow, he still believed he would walk out a free man. He believed the truth would rise, even if it took decades. And when it finally did, it exposed a system that spent 30 years fighting to kill a man it knew was innocent, a case built on bad forensics, false assumptions, and a refusal to admit it was wrong. This is not just a story about one man's suffering. It's a story about hope that refused to die, and a justice system that forced an innocent man to stare death in the face for a crime he didn't commit. This is the story of Anthony Ray Hinton, a man who survived death row and then used his freedom to expose the truth America tried to bury. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss our deep dive investigations into wrongful convictions. Your support helps us bring truth to light, and it gives a voice to those the system tried to silence. This is Innocence Uncovered, exposing injustice, uncovering truth, one story at a time. Before the world would know his name, before newspapers would label him a monster, Anthony Ray Hinton was just a quiet young man in Alabama who believed in simple things: loyalty, steady work, and the comfort of knowing your life is finally going somewhere. On that morning in 1985, he woke up thinking only about one thing: getting to his shift at the warehouse. Work was routine, predictable. It didn't solve everything, but it kept life steady. And for a young black man in the South, steadiness was precious. The sun was already warm by the time he stepped outside, coating the neighborhood in that familiar Alabama haze. A scent of cut grass drifted in the air. Kids were already outside, chasing each other with the kind of freedom adults lose far too soon. Ray locked his door. Another normal day. Another day ruled by clock in, clock out survival. But he had no idea he was walking straight into a nightmare that would swallow 3 entire decades of his life. He didn't know that before the sun set, his name would be written in a police report. He didn't know that by nightfall, detectives would be pounding on his mother's door. He didn't know that he would soon be placed in a room with men whose only mission was to pin a crime on somebody, anybody, so long as they got a conviction. But the world doesn't warn you before it takes everything. Inside the warehouse, Ray worked quietly as always. He didn't complain, didn't stir trouble, didn't even talk much unless someone spoke to him first. He wasn't a man built for conflict. He was built for peace. Around lunchtime, he stepped outside, wiping sweat from his forehead, letting the breeze cool him. And that's when he first heard it, the distant wail of sirens. Not close enough to notice, just close enough to feel. The sound passed. The day continued, and Ray returned to stacking boxes, unaware that somewhere else in the same city, police officers were already circling around a crime scene, a shooting at a restaurant, a shooting that someone, days later, would try to connect to him, a shooting he had absolutely nothing to do with. But in a justice system built on patterns of assumption, race, class, convenience, innocence is not protection. Innocence is just a detail. When Ray got home that day, his mother was cooking. Something simple, something warm, The kind of meal that told you everything would be okay, even if it wasn't. She smiled the moment he walked in. "Long day?" she asked. He nodded. "Just tired. Nothing unusual. Nothing strange. Not a single sign that the universe was already shifting under his feet." But a few hours later, they heard it. A loud knock. Another. Then another, harder this time. Ray froze. His mother stood behind him, confused. And when he opened the door, everything changed. Two officers stood there, uniforms stiff, expressions carved from stone. "Are you Anthony Ray Hinton?" one of them asked. Ray nodded, slow and cautious. "We need you to come with us." His mother's voice cracked. "For what? What is this about?" The officers didn't answer. They didn't have answers. Only a mission. A name. A face. A target. Ray looked back at his mother, trying to reassure her. "I'll be back," he whispered, believing it. He didn't know it would take 30 years. The drive to the station was silent. Cold. Ray sat in the back seat, heartbeat thundering in his ears. He didn't understand. What could they possibly want with him? When they arrived, the air in the police station felt heavier, thicker, like it held secrets no one dared to speak. The officers escorted him into a cramped room with yellowed walls, a single metal table, and two chairs that felt like they'd seen more threats than conversations. A detective walked in. His expression told Ray everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a routine question. This was an accusation already shaped, and Ray was just the body they needed to fill the outline. The detective sat across from him. "You know why you're here?" he asked. Ray shook his head. "You're being questioned in connection with 2 murders." Ray blinked. Once, twice, trying to process the words. "Murders? I don't know anything about that." The detective leaned forward. "We have reason to believe otherwise." There it was. A sentence that didn't need evidence. A sentence that didn't need truth. A sentence built on assumption, bias, and the comfort of having a suspect they could point to. Ray's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything." But the detective's eyes were flat. "You'll have your chance to explain." Except in that room, explanation didn't matter. Truth didn't matter. This wasn't about facts. It was about closure. And Ray had been selected to provide it. For hours, they questioned him, pushed him, cornered him with statements disguised as questions. "Where were you on the night of the murders? Who can confirm it? Why should we believe you?" The walls felt like they were closing in. Ray told the truth. He was at work, locked in a warehouse with no access to the outside world. He didn't own a gun. He had no connection to the victims. But innocence becomes fragile when no one in the room values it. The detectives left, returned, left again, but every time they re-entered, their minds were unchanged. And Ray realized something terrifying. They weren't searching for the truth. They were searching for a confession. By the time they finally stopped, Ray was exhausted, confused, scared in a way he had never felt before. But still, he believed that the truth would protect him. That belief would soon be destroyed. When the detectives finally left him alone, Ray stared at the table. His hands shook. His breath came uneven. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him, flickering like they were struggling to stay alive, just like his hope. And then the door opened again. A new officer stepped in. Calm, cold, certain. He sat down across from Ray and leaned forward with a confidence that made Ray's stomach churn. "I want to be straight with you," the officer said. "We're going to put you on death row." Ray's heart stopped. "But you didn't do it," the officer added. "I believe that." For a moment, hope flickered. But only for a moment. "Doesn't matter," the officer continued. "You're black. You're poor. You've got nobody to fight for you. People are going to want someone to pay." Ray stared at him, horrified. "And let me tell you something else," the officer said, his voice lowering to a chilling whisper. "Whether you did it or not, you're going to the row." The words hit like a blow to the chest. Ray's reality shattered. His innocence, irrelevant. His truth, meaningless. His life, expendable. Those were the words that would echo through him for the next 30 years. And that was the moment Ray understood the system didn't see him as a man. It saw him as a statistic, a body, a conviction waiting to happen. When they finally released him from questioning, Ray walked outside into the cool Alabama night. His mother was waiting, arms wrapped around herself, fear staining her face. "Ray, what did they say?" she whispered. He couldn't answer. Not fully. Not honestly. How do you tell your mother that the system she pays taxes to, trusts, respects, has decided her son is disposable? Instead, he told her what he wished was true. "It's nothing," he said. "Just questions." But as they drove home, Ray stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur into gold streaks. His chest felt tight. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He knew the truth. This wasn't over. This was the beginning. The sky above him was dark, but not the kind of dark that promises rest. It was a dark that foreshadowed a storm that would swallow 30 years of his life, bury his innocence, test his sanity, and force him into battles no human should ever be forced to fight. And as the car rolled into the driveway, Ray glanced at his mother, the woman who would soon spend decades fighting a system determined to destroy her son. He didn't know how bad it would get, but he could feel it. He could feel the world shifting beneath him. And tomorrow, the nightmare would begin to take shape. Because tomorrow, they would come back. The next morning, Anthony Ray Hinton woke to a kind of silence that didn't feel natural. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm. It felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. His mother was at the kitchen table, hands clasped together in front of her. She didn't look up when he walked in. She only stared at the door, as if she already knew what was coming. And she did, because mothers always know when danger is coming for their children. Before Ray could speak, before he could ask if she was okay, the knock came. Not a single knock this time. A pounding, a demand, a warning. Ray's heart sank. His mother's eyes glazed with dread. And when he opened the door, there they were, officers standing in formation, as if they were prepared for war. Except the war was a quiet man who had never harmed anyone in his life. "Anthony Ray Hinton," the lead officer said, "you're under arrest." Ray's mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "For what? What are you accusing my son of?" The officer didn't even look at her. Ray's fate was already written. And today, they had come to collect him. They didn't hand Ray the truth. They didn't need truth. They had a narrative. "You are being charged with 2 counts of capital murder." The words hit Ray like ice water. 2 counts. Capital murder. Death penalty cases. His mother gasped, a sound Ray would never forget. He tried to speak, to ask why, to demand explanations, but the officers moved with robotic efficiency. His wrists were pulled behind him, metal cuffs clamping tight. His mother cried out, "Stop, please." He didn't do anything. But they didn't stop. They didn't pause. They didn't even hesitate. They simply dragged her son out of her home like he was an object, a trophy they had the privilege of seizing. As Ray was placed in the squad car, he saw her standing in the doorway, one hand on her heart, the other reaching toward him as if she could physically pull him back. Her voice cracked as she called his name. It was a sound no son should ever hear. It was the last sound of freedom he would remember. The ride to the station was different this time. The silence wasn't awkward, it was suffocating. Ray stared out the window, watching familiar houses pass by. He tried to memorize every detail. The trees, the cracked sidewalks, the kids riding bikes. Because something inside him whispered a terrifying truth. He might not see these things again. At the station, he was booked, fingerprinted, processed, all while being treated as if he were already guilty. Evidence didn't matter. Witnesses didn't matter. His alibi didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that they had a suspect who fit the story they wanted to tell. Black, poor, convenient. Once the machine starts moving, innocence is irrelevant. Ray was escorted into a room with bright overhead lights and a long one-way mirror. Several men were already standing inside, some nervous, some confused. Ray didn't belong there. Not morally, not logically, but to the system, he fit the mold. The detective approached him. "Just follow instructions." Ray stepped into line, heart hammering. He didn't know the rules, didn't know what to say, didn't know why he was being placed in a lineup when he had never been anywhere near the crimes. He stood still, waiting for something, anything, to make sense. Instead, the door opened. A witness walked in. Ray didn't know who the man was, didn't know why he was here, didn't know what he had seen, but he knew something was wrong the moment the witness hesitated. The man squinted through the glass, leaned forward, tilted his head. Not certainty, not recognition, confusion, until a detective leaned in and whispered something the room wasn't supposed to hear. Something that nudged the witness toward a name, a face, a target. Moments later, the witness lifted his hand and pointed at Ray. Ray felt his stomach drop. The world around him went quiet. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but he did none of that. He simply stood there, trying to breathe, realizing that in this moment, his life had shifted from uncertainty to catastrophe. Later, the detectives asked Ray if there was a gun in his home. He told the truth. There was an old .38 revolver in his mother's possession, owned by his late father. He had never fired it, never touched it, never even thought about it. But when you're a suspect, anything you say becomes ammunition. They seized the gun, bagged it, labeled it as evidence. And even though ballistic science would later show the gun could not have been the murder weapon, that didn't matter. Because the state wasn't searching for truth. They were searching for finality. A weapon in the home was close enough to shape a narrative, close enough to manipulate, close enough to sell. And so the gun, irrelevant, unconnected, non-matching, became the centerpiece of a prosecution built on desperation, not accuracy. They didn't need it to match. They just needed a jury to think it might. After hours of questions, fingerprinting, and silent dread, Ray was finally taken to meet the man assigned to represent him, his court-appointed attorney. A man he had never met. A man who didn't know him. A man who didn't seem interested in knowing him. Ray sat across from him, searching his face for hope, for assurance, for anything. Instead, he was met with indifference. The attorney tapped a pen on the table, staring at the case file like it was an inconvenience. "They're charging you with capital murder," he said flatly. Ray nodded. "But I didn't do anything." The attorney shrugged, not because he didn't believe Ray, but because belief wasn't part of his job. Not in his mind. What mattered was the caseload, the hours, the system, the conveyor belt of poor defendants who passed through faster than he could keep track. Ray leaned forward. "Can you prove I didn't do it?" "They got the wrong man." Another shrug. "I'll do what I can." But Ray could hear it in his tone. What he meant was, "I'll do as little as possible." And then came the sentence that would haunt Ray for years. "We can ask for a plea deal." Ray stared at him, stunned. "Plea? To something I didn't do?" The attorney sighed. "You're facing death row. You need to think about what the state wants, not what you want." Ray felt heat rise in his chest. "I'm innocent." But his attorney was already closing the folder. Already standing. Already done. "Think about the deal," he said, walking toward the door. "It might be your only chance." And then he was gone, leaving Ray alone to realize something devastating. He wasn't just fighting the state. He was fighting his own defense. That night, Ray was placed in a holding cell, not yet convicted, but already treated like a man whose fate was sealed. The metal door slammed shut behind him with a finality that made his heart drop. The cell was small, cold, and damp. A thin mattress sat on a concrete slab. A toilet in the corner offered no privacy. This wasn't a temporary inconvenience. This was a preview, a glimpse into the world the state intended to bury him in. Ray sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Tears threatened, but he refused to let them fall. He needed clarity. He needed to stay strong. He needed to survive. But the weight of the accusation, the impossibility of proving a negative, felt crushing. He didn't know yet that forensic science would later prove the gun wasn't a match. He didn't know yet that his attorney would fail him in every way a lawyer could fail a client. He didn't know yet that the judge presiding over his case would carry racial bias. He He didn't know yet that he would lose nearly every appeal for 3 decades. He didn't know any of that. All he knew was this. The world believed he killed 2 men. The state was preparing to send him to the row, and he had no one fighting for him. Ray lay back on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. A single fluorescent light flickered overhead. It buzzed softly. Flicker. Buzz. Flicker. The same sound he'd hear later on death row. A mechanical heartbeat inside a place built to kill men slowly. Tonight was the beginning. Tonight was the first night of 30 years stolen. Ray tried to sleep, tried to steady his breathing, tried to keep his mind from spiraling into fear. But the truth was unavoidable. Tomorrow, he would be arraigned. Tomorrow, the state would formalize the charges. Tomorrow, the machine would begin moving faster. And tomorrow, the world would begin to forget he was innocent. Because the justice system had already decided who he was. Tomorrow would not bring answers. It would bring accusations, headlines, fingerprints, handcuffs, a courtroom filled with people who had already chosen a side. And none of them chose him. Ray closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "Lord, don't let them kill me for something I didn't do." The cell was silent. The light flickered one more time, and morning crept closer. When Anthony Ray Hinton was escorted into the courtroom for the first time, he expected fear. He expected tension. He expected uncertainty. What he didn't expect was silence, the kind of silence that feels rehearsed, staged, and practiced. Every eye turned toward him, not with curiosity, not with sympathy, but with judgment. It wasn't spoken, but Ray could feel what the room believed before a single word was said. That's him. That's the killer. That's the man they caught. Truth didn't walk into that courtroom with him. Only accusations did. And the system, from the bailiff to the reporters to the spectators, embraced those accusations long before evidence entered the room. Ray took his seat beside the man assigned to protect him, and the chair felt like a chair designed for defeat. He was in a battlefield with no armor, no weapon, and no reinforcements. Only a prayer. Ray had been afraid of the prosecution. He had feared law enforcement. He had feared the death penalty statute hanging over his head. But he wasn't prepared for the judge. A man who didn't look at Ray, not really. A man who listened with the expression of someone tolerating noise rather than absorbing information. A man whose decisions fell like stones, each one heavier than the last. From the first minutes of the trial, Ray understood something devastating. This judge had already made up his mind. Not based on evidence, not based on testimony, not based on fairness, but based on something older, something toxic, something passed down generationally. Bias. He felt its weight every time the judge sustained the prosecution and dismissed the defense before words left their mouths. Ray wasn't on trial for murder. He was on trial for existing in the wrong place, in the wrong body, at the wrong time, in a courtroom that saw him as everything except innocent. The prosecution unfolded their narrative with the confidence of storytellers, not truth seekers. They painted Ray as a shadowy figure moving through Birmingham nights, a man the community feared, a man with motives no one could explain, but everyone was told to believe. Their evidence? Shaky, circumstantial, fragile. Their witnesses? Uncertain, contradictory, inconsistent. Their ballistic expert? A man who would later be proven incompetent, unqualified, and inaccurate. But none of that mattered in the moment. Because the prosecution didn't rely on facts. They relied on performance. And the jury absorbed every word. Not because the story made sense, but because the story was delivered with force. Ray watched from his seat, listening to a version of himself that didn't exist. A phantom, a monster, a villain written from thin air. It was surreal, hearing lies about your own life spoken as though they were gospel. He kept waiting for someone to object, for someone to point out the holes, for someone to say, "This doesn't make sense." But that someone wasn't in the room. When it was his attorney's turn, Ray felt a small, flickering hope. But what unfolded next extinguished that hope completely. The attorney stumbled through questions. He seemed confused by the evidence. He mispronounced names. He looked unprepared, overwhelmed, outmatched. This wasn't a defense. It was a formality. A box checked. A step completed. An obligation fulfilled without commitment. The jury leaned forward during the prosecution's speeches. They leaned back during the defense. The contrast was undeniable. When Ray's attorney attempted to challenge the state's ballistic claims, he didn't bring in experts. He didn't challenge methodology. He didn't question the science. He simply accepted the prosecution's words as if they were carved in stone. Ray felt something break inside him as he watched, something sharp and painful. If a man is drowning, he at least wants someone to throw him a rope. But his attorney didn't throw a rope. He watched from the shore, and Ray drowned alone. One piece of evidence could have saved Ray entirely, his alibi. He wasn't near the crime scenes. He wasn't in the vicinity. He wasn't even accessible. He was at work, clocked in, accounted for, concrete, verifiable, provable. Yet the jury never heard it properly. The defense never emphasized it. The attorney never built the case around it. It was like shouting fire in a hurricane. The truth was swallowed by the storm. Ray watched as the most important fact of his innocence was treated like an afterthought. He realized something terrifying. The truth may have existed, but it had no advocate. And without an advocate, the truth is easy to bury. Ray didn't know the exact second the verdict sealed his fate, but he felt it. There was a witness describing the gunman, a description that didn't match Ray. A man different in build, height, appearance. The inconsistencies should have mattered. They didn't, because the prosecutor only needed one thing: fear. He spoke to the jury about danger, chaos, violence, men like him. It was those three words, men like him, that shifted the air in the courtroom. Ray felt it ripple through the jury box. Their posture changed. Their expressions tightened. Something inside them closed. Not just to him, to the possibility of his innocence. In that moment, the verdict wasn't about evidence. It was about who the state told them he was, and who the state told them to fear. Against his attorney's advice, Ray insisted on speaking. If no one else would defend him, he would defend himself. He walked to the stand, sat down, placed his hands together to stop the shaking. He looked at the jury, not with anger, not with desperation, but with sincerity. "I didn't do this," he said quietly. "I wasn't there. I have never hurt anyone in my life." His voice was steady, his eyes clear. For a moment, the room softened. Even the prosecution hesitated. But then came the cross-examination, not to find truth, but to dismantle him. They twisted his words, questioned his memory, attacked his character, implied motives he didn't have. It didn't matter how politely he answered, how consistently he told the truth, how human he appeared. They weren't trying to understand him. They were trying to destroy his credibility. And the judge allowed it every step of the way. By closing arguments, Ray felt numb. The prosecution's speech was fiery, a dramatic monologue about justice, danger, and responsibility. The defense's speech was short, flat, and forgettable. The jury listened to one side with intensity. They listened to the other side with obligation. When both attorneys finished, the courtroom fell quiet. A quiet that Ray had come to recognize. The kind that comes right before a life is taken. He looked up at the ceiling, inhaling slowly, whispering a prayer under his breath. "God, I need you." The jury returned faster than anyone expected. Too fast. A verdict that swift never bodes well. Ray felt the air disappear from the room. The judge asked the question. The foreman stood. In a voice colder than winter, he spoke. "Guilty." The world didn't spin. It didn't collapse. It didn't explode. It just stopped. Ray didn't hear his mother's cry. Didn't feel the bailiff's hand tightening on his arm. Didn't process the reporters scrambling for quotes. He only heard one thought. "They're going to kill me for something I didn't do." And then the final blow. "We sentence you to death." The room didn't gasp. Because this was Alabama. Death wasn't shocking. Death was expected. Ray closed his eyes as the weight of the sentence settled around him. They had just condemned an innocent man, and no one in that courtroom seemed to care. The courtroom was supposed to be a place where truth could finally break through. But for Anthony Ray Hinton, it became something else entirely. A stage where the state doubled down on a story that was already falling apart. By the mid-1990s, his legal team had uncovered what should have been case-ending revelations. Ballistics experts from across the country examined the revolver the state claimed was the murder weapon, and every single one of them said the same thing. The bullets did not match that gun. They never had. They never would. Even the state's own witness, a man whose testimony helped secure Hinton's death sentence, admitted he could no longer stand by his original findings. For most people, that would be enough. Enough to reopen a case. Enough to grant a new trial. Enough to stop an innocent man from being strapped to a gurney and executed. But not in Alabama. Not in Ray's case. The Attorney General's office argued that even if the bullets didn't match, that didn't necessarily mean Hinton was innocent. They began shifting their theory, not because the evidence supported them, but because they refused to admit what had become unavoidable. They had the wrong man. And instead of facing that truth, the system began twisting itself into knots to avoid accountability. Prosecutors claimed the conviction should stand because a reasonable juror could still have found guilt, even without the original ballistics evidence. It didn't matter that Ray had a verifiable alibi. It didn't matter that no physical evidence tied him to the crime scenes. It didn't matter that fingerprints, eyewitnesses, and timelines all contradicted the state's case. They had a conviction, and some of them would rather defend a mistake than admit to it. To Ray, watching these arguments unfold was like witnessing a nightmare you've already lived once before. He remembered the first trial, how quickly the jury returned with a death sentence, how the judge refused to grant funds for a qualified expert, how the prosecutor smiled when he said Ray would burn in hell. And now, decades later, he was watching the same machinery grind forward with the same cold indifference. But something had changed. Ray was no longer standing alone. Powerful legal voices began stepping in. Lawyers, investigators, national innocence organizations, each adding their weight to a truth that could no longer be buried. The case reached the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, where 3 federal judges reviewed the evidence, the trial errors, and the catastrophic failures that led to Ray's conviction. And for the first time in decades, someone in power finally said what the system refused to acknowledge. This conviction was unconstitutional. The defense expert was unqualified. The trial was unreliable. And Anthony Ray Hinton deserved a new one. Ray was elated. This was the ruling he had dreamed about for 20 years. One step, just one step, from proving his innocence in open court. But the victory was short-lived. Alabama appealed the decision. They pushed the case all the way to the United States Supreme Court, arguing once again that Ray didn't deserve a new trial. Not because the evidence made sense, but because the state didn't want to unravel a conviction they built. For Ray, the wait for the Supreme Court decision was its own kind of torture. Days felt like months. Nights felt endless. Every time the intercom buzzed outside his cell, a jolt ran through his body, because the sound wasn't just for routine checks. It was also the same buzz they used on execution days. Ray lived with that uncertainty constantly. Every moment was a reminder that his life depended not on truth, but on whether 9 people in Washington chose to listen. And then, one morning, a guard walked to his cell. "Ray," he said, "you have a ruling." Ray closed his eyes. His heart felt like it stopped. This was it. Everything he had fought for, everything he had begged the world to see, everything he had survived for. The guard handed him a sheet of paper. Ray scanned it. The words were simple, but they hit him with the force of a lifetime. Unanimous reversal. 9-0. The United States Supreme Court ruled that Ray's constitutional rights had been violated, that his trial was fundamentally flawed, that the state had failed him at every step. And the message beneath the legal language was unmistakable. He should never have been sent to death row. For the first time in 30 years, Ray could feel breath swell in his chest. His hands trembled as he held the paper. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but he never imagined the emotion that would swallow him whole when it finally arrived. Hope, real hope, was back. But freedom? That was still a battle. The Supreme Court didn't declare him innocent. They didn't order his immediate release. They didn't erase the decades stolen from him. They simply said he deserved a new trial. And Alabama now faced a choice. Retry a man using evidence that had already collapsed, or admit the truth and set him free. To raise disbelief, the state still tried to find a way to keep him locked up. They pushed theories that contradicted science. They clung to arguments that ignored their own experts. They fought as though their pride mattered more than a man's life. But the ground beneath them was crumbling. Everything they built, every claim, every assumption, every piece of their case, had been exposed under scrutiny. Finally, the last barrier fell. The state announced they could not retry Anthony Ray Hinton. The evidence was gone. The original testimony was discredited. The case, once presented as open and shut, was now revealed as deeply broken. A judge dismissed all charges. The conviction that stole 3 decades of Ray's life was wiped away. And after 30 years on death row, Anthony Ray Hinton walked into the sunlight, free. But freedom is not the end of the story, because the world he stepped into was not the one he left behind. The cost was deeper, darker, and more permanent than most people will ever understand. The day Anthony Ray Hinton walked out of Holman Correctional Facility, the sky looked impossibly wide. For 30 years, Ray had seen the world through a square of reinforced metal and bars. Now, standing outside the gates with nothing between him and the open air, he felt the weight of the sun settle on his face as if it were welcoming him back. Reporters waited. Supporters stood with signs. His attorneys held back tears. But Ray didn't speak at first. He stood still, silent, breathing for the first time as a free man since he was 29 years old. He had imagined this moment so many times from inside his cell. But freedom in reality felt different, heavier, brighter, more disorienting. He kept blinking, as if the world might disappear if he looked away too long. Then he smiled, a wide, unguarded, human smile that belonged only to a man who had survived the impossible. Walking into the world again was overwhelming. Cars sounded louder. Colors looked brighter. People moved faster than he remembered. And everywhere he went, Ray felt like he was stepping into someone else's life. A life he had been forced to watch from a distance for 3 long decades. At a fast food restaurant, Ray froze at the menu. The cashier asked what he wanted. Ray didn't know how to answer. When he walked in, he hadn't known what half the items were. When he went to pull out money, he fumbled with the bills. Currency had changed since he last held it. Freedom was beautiful, but it was also confusing, painful, unfamiliar. Even sleeping in a bed felt strange. After years of lying on a slab of thin foam, the softness made him restless. But the hardest part wasn't the adjustments. It wasn't technology or transportation or learning how to use a phone. The hardest part was grief. Ray had entered prison as a young man full of promise. He left as a man whose mother, the person who believed in him when the world turned its back, never got to see him free. When Ray first visited her grave, he knelt down and whispered, "I made it, Mama. I didn't let them break me." His voice cracked. Tears fell. But for the first time, they were tears shed in sunlight. Not long after his release, Ray made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would not stay silent. He had spent 3 decades locked away for a crime he didn't commit. He had survived death row, isolation, humiliation, and the never-ending threat of execution. He had watched men walk past his cell on the way to the death chamber, men who never came back. Ray understood better than anyone what a wrongful conviction steals: time, family, faith, self-worth, memory, the future itself. And he refused to let his suffering be wasted. He began traveling the country, sharing his story with students, activists, churches, judges, and lawmakers. He spoke not with bitterness, but with clarity. He described what it felt like to lose the prime of his life, to hear guards joke about his execution date, to be dismissed by people who should have protected him, to cling to hope when hope felt like a punishment. And he warned audiences about something most Americans never think about. It is terrifyingly easy to put an innocent person on death row. Ray's voice, calm, powerful, unwavering, began shifting minds. People who once believed wrongful convictions were rare began realizing the truth. They happen all the time, and the system is often designed to protect itself, not the innocent. Ray also found himself reconnecting with something he thought he had lost forever: joy. He laughed again, real laughter. He danced again, awkwardly, joyfully, freely. He spent afternoons sitting under the sky with friends, feeling grateful for every moment the system tried to take. But trauma leaves shadows. Some nights, he woke up sweating, heart racing, reliving sounds from death row, the clanging of metal doors, the shuffle of feet, the final prayers of a man walking to his death. Other times, he felt the weight of loneliness. 30 years leave scars that no apology or court ruling can erase. Yet Ray carried himself with grace, with humor, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone who had endured so much. His resilience became its own kind of testimony. In interviews, people often asked him, "Do you hate the people who did this to you?" Ray always answered the same way, quietly, without hesitation. "If I hate them, they win twice. They already took 30 years. I won't give them the rest of my life." His forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was an act of defiance, a refusal to let the system define him, a refusal to let injustice poison whatever future he had left. Over time, Ray became one of the most influential voices in the movement against wrongful convictions and the death penalty. He stood before lawmakers and demanded reform. He appeared on national television telling the world what was at stake. He wrote a book that exposed every failure the state tried to hide. He offered comfort to other exonerees who were still learning how to rebuild their lives. And through it all, he honored the one thing he fought 30 years to protect: his truth. Today, when Ray speaks to organizations, universities, and ordinary people, he often ends with a message: clear, haunting, unforgettable. If they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone. His story is not just about survival. It is a warning, a mirror held up to the justice system, a call for accountability. Anthony Ray Hinton is not just a man who was freed. He is a man who refused to be broken. A man who walked out of death row carrying a strength the state never intended him to have. And because of his courage, millions now understand the truth about wrongful convictions in America. This is the legacy of a man the system tried to silence. A man who faced death for a crime he did not commit. A man whose name now stands as a beacon for justice, compassion, and reform. This is the story of Anthony Ray Hinton, and his voice is still echoing.